Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Clark here for Leadership Conversations. This is a show where we talk about leadership according to the world that matters to you. We've made a commitment on this show to really expand the conversation about entrepreneurship. And I know that we typically talk about nonprofit entrepreneurship. But I also wanted to bring in somebody who has a pretty dynamic approach to entrepreneurship. He's run a couple of nonprofits and for profits and has a perspective I think that's valuable to the conversation. And I'm talking about the only Matt Conway. Matt, what's going on?
Not too much, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I had to have you on the show. Like you're one of the people that represents kind of this philosophy of nonprofit sustainability that I wholeheartedly believe in. So before we jump too far down the conversation, just introduce yourself, tell everybody about yourself, and who's Matt?
Yeah, so my name's Matt. I run an organization called the Rise Up Group, which is a 501c3. But one of the things that I've been blessed with on top of having this opportunity to run a nonprofit is a lot of experience in corporate America. So I graduated the University of Connecticut in 2011 with a degree in finance, which really opened up a lot of opportunities. The first being a leadership development program at GE Capital, which then led into more corporate experience at a healthcare startup, and most recently in a strategy role at Cigna. And having the opportunity to work in corporate America has helped me a lot from a nonprofit perspective, and also running organizations, because you learn a lot from other people and observing other people and seeing how very well run and successful organizations operate, and
Right.
being able to apply that to your startup is invaluable. It's almost like getting an MBA while you're getting a paycheck, which not many people are able to say. So
Yeah.
it's put me in a great position to be able to make a huge impact on the community while being able to support myself financially.
So that's interesting. I do want to just dig into that a little bit. You talked about the role corporate America has played in helping you learn how to run a business. Some people will say, you really the for-profit world, corporate America is so different from the nonprofit world. What did you take away from your corporate experience that has made a difference in how you've approached, the Rise Up Group and all that stuff?
Yeah, a lot of it is the process and the organizational structure, and the discipline that's in place, and the measurable goals that are in place in corporate America. There's a lot of repetitive meetings. There's a certain way to run a meeting. There's a certain way to communicate, a certain way to write an email, a certain way to put a pitch deck together. And being able to put a pitch deck together or sell, somebody on, a multi-million-dollar project can really help you sell $1,000, project when it comes to fundraising.
Yep.
Or, being able to communicate with higher level individuals in, foundations. It really helps to connect those dots.
Yeah, I mean, I take away from my corporate experience kind of the same principles. One of the things I was pretty clear on, and it wasn't until I got deep, I don't want to say deeper in my career, but I was in the nonprofit space for a while, was the fact that I observed there was this lack of professionalism among nonprofits. And I hate to say it that way, but professionalism from the perspective of, like you said, lack of process, lack of clear organizational structure, lack of discipline, and no focus on outcomes. Of course, nonprofits have come a long way. And continue to evolve. But, even when I talk with people who are looking to launch a project or a nonprofit, you don't get this sense of professionalism and seriousness that comes with the idea of launching a nonprofit. What comes with it, from what I've seen, and you can tell me how you see it too, is I see a need, I want to solve it, and nobody else is doing it the way I envision it. You rarely hear conversations about, all right, great, how are you going to finance it? How are you going to structure it? I don't even see you show up on times at meetings or coffee when we schedule it, yet you want to start a nonprofit. So how are you going to hold people accountable? I mean, what's been your observation when you see people say, or you hear people say rather, I want to start a nonprofit, and you kind of struggle to believe that this is something legitimate.
It's a lot of work, you know,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of goodwill out there, and there's a lot of people that can do good, but it takes a lot of, like you said, the structure and the basics of being able to show up on time, being able to be professional, that goes a long way. And I think that's where you see, you know, projects start and finish very, very quickly.
Mm.
Or you know, someone who has great intention of building this sustainable nonprofit, but it ends up being a 1 year
Mm.
type of initiative. And you know, I'm no different than a lot of a lot of people when it comes to that too, because I've gotten into positions or tried doing projects that I've seen a need and I've dove into it, and I'm like, oh, I can do it all. And then I very quickly realize, even if the professionalism's there, the time's not always there to juggle all these balls in the air. And I think the Mama J initiative is a great example of that. So, you know, I saw this need for employment needs in, you know, the food industry. I saw a need for grassroots fundraising for other nonprofits in, you know, in the Hartford area. And I built a relationship with a coffee shop that also served breakfast in the area. And so I was able to leverage their, you know, safe surf license and all of that. And I, you know, had this vision of growing this kind of breakfast fundraising platform into a food truck and all of that. And you know, quickly realized that you may not have time to, even if all the other pieces are there. You know, time is a big thing that ends up eating into your day when you're trying to do this mural initiative and you're trying to do this after school tutoring initiative and you have your day job. So I think that's another thing that people kind of take for granted is time, and how much time it actually takes to, you know, make something sustainable. Which, you know, I do have those sustainable initiatives, but sometimes you get over your own feet when you're running. So
Man. So let's kind of forward this conversation a bit. I ask this question all the time, and I'll
yeah.
ask you this: how do you define leadership?
So so there's a big difference between leadership and management, right? And leadership, I think, is being able to define a vision and get people behind that vision to move forward and accomplish a goal. Versus management is kind of more your day to day, you know, making sure people are writing, you know, dotting the i's and crossing the t's on the right way. But leadership is really developing the vision and getting people behind you and you know, creating change in a community that's bigger than yourself.
Mm, yeah, that's interesting. And I think, if we were to apply, your definition of leadership, I think there's a deficit,
Mm,
in so many communities where there isn't quite a vision in place
mm,
that has been articulated, let alone that has the response necessary from the right people to kind of
mm,
push it forward. So, with that said, I do want to talk about leadership from the perspective of, launching a project and really, having an entrepreneurial bend to it. So, I do want to ask you this question. Talk about the perspective of someone who is maintaining a job or
mm.
has maintained a job and has launched a whole separate organization. Talk about the hustle and what goes into balancing both, when you were developing Rise Up and
Mm.
you were working your 9 to 5 at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's really where leadership comes into play, because it's having a vision bigger than yourself. You
Mm.
know, like I would be fine working my 9 to 5 and, you know, working in corporate America and kind of doing that hustle. But when you see such a need, or a way to improve things in the community, it just sets off a fire inside you. And so kind of how I started in all this work, I graduated UConn, like I mentioned, and I had a job lined up at GE Capital in the fall after graduation. And during that summer, I worked at Weaver High School. So we had this really awesome summer employment program where we repainted the first and second floor with a group of about 40 students, foreshadowing Handy Vision, 5 years later. And so one of the biggest gaps that I recognized during this time frame was, I went to public school 20 minutes north of Hartford in the suburbs, and there was just the lack of basics. There wasn't a library at Weaver. There wasn't support outside this, as much support outside the school walls as you had just because the zip code that you lived in, whether it's coaches, family friends, aunts, uncles, you name it. And so I saw this kind of deficit, and I wanted to bring that support to Hartford and to Weaver. And so I couldn't, I say sell my soul to corporate America after, spending the summer at Weaver. And I, called up a couple of my buddies, and we ended up starting this, mentoring program. And so fast forward to the spring of 2012, we did our first kind of presentation to a group of students at Weaver High School to talk to them about our mentoring program. And another huge gap that I recognized in this nonprofit industry is the lack of continuity of support to kids. And so a student raised her hand after we gave our presentation on, here's how much more money you make when you're in college, after you graduate college. Here's, your career path, your path out of poverty, you name it. And, she challenged us a lot. She's like, so are you saying, my friend who's a paraprofessional is, less than any of this? And, we had to kind of backstep some of our comments and listen to her. And then, we came up to her at the afterwards and really started probing why she gave us a challenge, because we could tell she was a very articulate, very smart girl. And she said, how do I know you guys are another group that's coming in here and 6 weeks later you're going to be gone? Mm-hmm. And that impacted us a lot. And it really made us think about how we're going to go forward and do this work in the community. And it made us much more conscious of that work. And, fast forward 6 years, she's now on our board of directors and is at UConn Law School. Yeah. But it helped to really, navigate our work and again, show the disconnect that there may be nonprofits who have been here for 25 years, and I don't want to take away from a lot of the work that they've done, but there's a huge gap in continuity of support. And so even the work that we started with Handy Vision, those were students from that paint program, back at Weaver that we started Handy Vision with. And, I saw that they didn't have that continuity of support after high school, pulled them into, let's start shoveling snow, let's start raking leaves, let's start mowing lawns. Mm-hmm. And literally we helped provide a sustainable path of employment, sustainable skills that they can take on afterwards. And it's really just kind of identifying the needs, coming up with developing a vision and being amenable to that vision based on what you hear in the community.
So for the person who is working a regular job, yeah, who has a desire, a vision to launch a nonprofit, a special project in their community, how do they effectively balance the hustle of a regular paycheck and launching a passion project?
The Rise Up's kind of slogan, it's on the back of all of our t-shirts, is get after it. That, in my opinion, that's all it takes, is just, if you have an idea, you sketch out a plan, because you have to have a plan. If you just go and do it, you're not going to accomplish all your goals. But you just get after it and you just do it. It's honestly really not that hard to if you're truly passionate about something, to just get after it and do it.
So
You know?
that I agree with, and I think that there's a huge opportunity for folks to just do it. But then the question becomes, if they desire to take it to the next level, which
Mhm.
the next level is inclusive of funding,
Yep.
um, perhaps not sustainable funding, but funding.
Mhm.
How do they balance that hustle, man?
Yeah. So just like kind of what started the concept of Rise Up, which is, networking.
Hmm.
The network of people I had as a teenager. I was interning at a private equity company my senior year of high school because the owner was in my uncle's wedding. And I made that phone call to him and say, hey, I'm interested in finance, and it led down to that path. Um, First thing I did when I got to college, it was going to all these seminars that companies were holding. It was meeting people. It was, introducing yourself. It was getting out there. And I think that's the number one key, whether you're in corporate America or you're trying to start your own hustle, it's getting out there and networking, because it's everyone else around you that's going to help you find your next job, that's going to help you find that next funding source, that's going to help consult you or advise you on the ideas you have. So you have to build that strong network around you to actually be successful.
I don't disagree with you, but then speak to the person who feels like there's nobody that can understand me. There's nobody that's doing what I got in my mind. How do I network with people who will invest or who will buy into what I'm selling?
I would push back and say that there is somebody out there. It may not be that exact idea, that exact concept, but if you can articulate your idea strong enough and the vision you have for it and the outcomes it's going to produce, somebody will listen. So
Mm, good point. It makes me think back to one of our earliest exchanges, which was the first Emerging Leaders Conference,
mhm.
and that conference, man, the spirit of the conference still lives. Like
Yeah.
in terms of why I'm doing it and the 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 necessity of it,
Mhm.
it still lives. And I remember I show up at the event space and it's snowing, and I'm like, oh, this is not good. And then 20 people show up,
Mhm.
and it was an interesting experience because I think I had conversations with you leading up to that event, during the event, where it was just like, okay, is this worth continuing on, and how do you continue to push this thing down the road? And I think, to your point about networking, you got to figure out what network makes the most
Mhm.
sense for the continuation and the sustainability of your project. I think for what ended up happening with the Emerging Leaders Conference, which is coming up May 30th of
Mhm.
2019. I don't know when this podcast is going to air. Um, it's evolved
Mhm.
to the point where after the first year that you were involved and you made me that awesome egg sandwich with honey, dude. Like I wasn't even expecting it. Like, what the heck was that? Like it was just a gift. Like you just brought me an egg sandwich and I needed it with the honey. It just made a difference. Um, and we had it at an awesome space in
Yeah.
Hartford. To the next year, I just wasn't even sure I was going to do it.
Mhm.
So I planned it at the last minute, but I actually did it for my staff at the
Mhm.
time. And then a year after that, I did it with my staff. And then I invited some outsiders who weren't a part of our team or
Mhm.
organization. So this year, I don't even know how many people we got registered. I only allotted 50 seats
Mhm.
because that's the space we
Yeah.
had. It's like my budget was like, nah, no more than 50. Yeah, that went just like that.
Yeah.
And then now I had to open up more seats, and I'm about to shut it down with like 4 weeks to go.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it's evolved. And I think to your point, you got to figure out the lane
Mhm.
where it makes sense. So, I mean, how can people, let's have this conversation. How can people start to um, identify the right networking lanes that make sense for their project, passion project, their
Yeah.
vision?
Well, you have to have a track record. That needs to happen, and every entrepreneur has to work for free for a long time. And a good example is like our Hartford Murals project that we do. So we've done over a dozen public art murals in the city of Hartford, and for a long time they were being done at a loss, if you will. So I was end up putting in personal money to close the gaps, but I believed in what public art can do for the city. I believed in the process we were creating, where we were getting hundreds of volunteers out to help create this artwork. And it was quality artwork because we'd also bring in the professional artists to make sure it looked good, to the point where now, we're being approached by corporations and multinational organizations to come do murals for them
Mm.
at a a profit, if you will, for the nonprofit, but a profit for the nonprofit, where we can now allocate programmatic budget back into the organization, and it's not all just going out the door, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, I think, one of the conversations you've mentioned before is the sustainability part and creating that business model for your organization. And that's what we're trying to create, is having a huge impact on the community, and also figuring out a way to be sustainable without having to write grants or ask for donations all the time.
Man,
Those are still necessary because you're not going to close your budget gap without it, but finding those other initiatives that can help bring in funding from a business standpoint.
all right. So I'm gonna go down this rabbit hole with you for a moment, right? So you said you got to have a track record and you got to work for free. There are people gonna watch this podcast and say, I'm doing that and I'm still not getting any burn. I'm not getting any recognition. I'm gonna go back to what you said earlier, and I think you and I share this from my corporate experience. I think what people do forget is that, yes, you got to have a track record and you got to work for free, invest back
Mm-hmm.
into the business. A nonprofit is a business. But I think in doing that, the four principles you laid out from what you learned from corporate still has to be active. You got to have and develop a process for how
Mm-hmm.
you run business,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The regular operations of Rise Up, the nonprofit I'm at, what we do day to day, the processes matter. I think the org structure matters.
Mm-hmm.
The not necessarily the pecking order, but then the role everybody plays in the organization. Even if you subscribe to a flat organizational structure, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that everybody plays a significant role that makes a difference has to be defined and
Yep.
articulated. Discipline in how you behave, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily in like, I mean, yeah, culture and all that other good stuff, but then the discipline in how you get stuff done. If funding goes away, if all hell breaks loose,
Mm-hmm.
if clients don't show up, the discipline to stay the course, and then getting outcomes, which is like, it used to be a curse word,
Mm-hmm.
nonprofits. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, maybe we got outcomes, but I know a good story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
good story doesn't equate to outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to highlight culture as something that does matter. In a for-profit, nonprofit, it doesn't matter. Culture matters, and I think the culture of performance, culture, discipline, culture, a process, it makes a unique impact, and all of that factors into why you work for free and invest back into the
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit. But then it gives you the drive to build the track record to
Yeah.
say, hey, to a funder, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, man, we went from 20 people on a snowy day,
Mm-hmm.
then we shrunk it down to 12 people, and then we grew it to 30 people, and now we got 80 people.
Yeah.
You might want to invest in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
How do I respond as an investor, or just that
No, just
whole?
as someone who's hustling, like
Yeah.
you still on the rise up, on the
Yeah,
come up. Like,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's all about the growth. That's what I
yeah,
say. If you're always improving something, you're and always leaving an impact, even if it's a handful of people. We're doing this in the end for the betterment of other people. And
bro.
you can't forget that. And as soon as you forget it, and it does become like a like just straight up business profit, it's gonna fail, and that's I
Facts.
think it's the incremental growth. It's recognizing the handful of people that you may impact out of 50 in a room, that really matters. And even out of that 20 people that were in the room that first event, that was a room filled with great conversation. You
It
know,
was.
everybody was
It
engaged,
was.
everyone was contributing, and if you had 100 people there, it may not have had that same type of dynamic. So
Yeah.
I think I'm very, optimistic person and can find the good or the growth in everything. Even if you fail, like that's a learning moment for you. That's
Yeah.
a reason to grow. And I think as long as you're growing, you're not failing. So
One of the things I remember you saying in the last show when we were together was failure is a learning opportunity. I totally subscribe to that. Explain that more for the person who's never heard of that or doesn't believe in that, who doesn't believe that failure is learning opportunity. Failure is just straight up failure. And to that, you say what?
I, I don't know. Failure, it's just kind of in my DNA, that failure is a growing opportunity because when stopping something is failing. Saying I can't is failing. And I guess it was just the way I was raised was to always just push forward, and having that, taking something from every opportunity is just the way you got to have your mindset right. It's comes down to mindset. It comes down to just it's got to be in your DNA, and you can change your mindset by being disciplined. And I'll take working out as an example. um you can literally change the way your body looks by mentally telling your body how you want it to be shaped as you're working out.
Yeah.
Like, I had a friend that we used to work out with in college every day. He wanted like big biceps, and he was a skinny little kid when we first started at UConn. And we'd go to the gym every day together, and he literally would talk to his arms. And by the time we graduated, he had the biggest arms out of all of our friends. And I'd take myself as an example, like telling myself right when I get into the gym, here's what I want to accomplish, and just focusing on that in your mind, you will accomplish that and you will get stronger.
Mm.
And you can apply that to anything, becoming a better reader, becoming a better speaker, becoming, anything. It's overcoming the fear of failure, and just pushing forward.
So I love what you said. You said failure is quitting.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of this series at my church. I'm teaching my congregation um, that to experience a transformed life, according to Scripture, begins with a renewed mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as you articulated, whether it's working out, dieting habits, making the decision to go back to school, changing careers, uh, getting into out of relationships, and
Mm-hmm.
having an experience, a life experience that is transformational, it begins with the mind. And I think, as I'm like processing what you're saying, because I remember you saying those things 3-4 years ago when the conference happened, and I was just like, I don't know. I know it's important, I know it's needed, and you said some of the same things to me. It does require a mind shift
Mm-hmm.
that is difficult to kind of go through. Because even as I rethink about the journey I took to still do the Emerging Leaders Conference, and how it's supported now, how it's backed now, it's different than what
Mm-hmm.
I expected, different from where I started, and that journey was not overnight at all. So, what words of encouragement, what advice do you have for people who are in a moment,
Mm-hmm.
and they in this moment they feel like, I don't know, man, you know I don't know about tomorrow in terms of my nonprofit, in terms of their passion project. What do you say to them to kind of encourage them to push forward?
Yeah, I'll go back to our slogan. You got to just get after it. I'm someone who sees the best in everybody as well, and everyone has the strength to overcome every obstacle. There was a great meme on Facebook that I saw this week, and it was a picture of a rose and a picture of a dandelion. And the rose, it was, the meme above it was, the soil's not the right pH level, I'm going to die. And then the dandelion was growing out of concrete, and it was just like, concrete what? Like, I'm going to take over concrete. And the person's caption on it was like, sometimes we think we're roses, but we're all actually dandelions. Like, we can get through a lot of stuff and overcome a lot of obstacles where we're not as fragile as we may think we are. And I think it's just looking internally and realizing and putting a plan together, writing it down. You can overcome whatever challenge that you may be facing, and use your network to help overcome those challenges as well.
Mm. Let me start to go down these pointed questions.
Yeah.
What strategies helped you launch your various ventures, and perhaps it might be a good opportunity to talk about the ventures you have going
Yeah.
on, and then talk about the strategies that helped you get off the ground.
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is identifying a need or a gap, and really analyzing how that what you're trying to develop is going to impact that gap or need, making sure you have the resources in place to accomplish and fulfill that need, um, and kind of stay in your lane too. Don't try and solve problems that you can't pull the resources in to make happen.
Yeah.
And leverage your network is a big thing. So first thing I did a couple of the initiatives we have, the core Rise Up, which is Rise Up University, which is a mentoring and tutoring program after school where we're really helping kids get up to grade level, identifying post secondary opportunities after college, whether it's trade school. Or post secondary opportunities after high school, whether it's trade school or college or military employment, and like I said, one of our first students through that program is now at UConn Law School and is back on our board of directors. So another initiative we've started is Hartford Murals. So that's the public mural projects that we've done in the community. We've done Mama J's, which has, well, it lasted, I'll call it one season. It raised thousands of dollars for other nonprofits in the area and helped employ high school kids learning how to cook on the weekends, which, while it wasn't sustainable necessarily because of the time aspect, it did leave its impact. One of the more exciting things we've done is Handy Vision, which is a landscaping and kind of handyman type company where we were shoveling snow, raking leaves. We had sustainable clientele mowing their lawns. Again, it came back to time and to continue that on. And also, a big project I've been involved in is called Section 7 Real Estate, which is probably our most sustainable financial model, which is providing low income housing and employment opportunities by supporting the house, subsidized through kind of more market rate housing rents. And that's really created a sustainable platform to create jobs, give families, good homes to live in, and also provide folks who are coming from out of Hartford a good, safe place to live. But it all came down to need. It's I think the platform of any successful community is education, employment, and housing. And so we've recognized those needs and have tried to fill them in different ways.
Yeah, so that makes a ton of sense to me. I do want to go back to the four things you mentioned. You mentioned fill the gap, find resources, stay in your lane, and leverage your network. When you talk about filling the gap, you can talk to a number of people in the city
Mm-hmm.
or any city, and they'll say to you, "Man, nobody's doing X." And one of the things that has challenged me a lot
Mm-hmm.
is when I hear that, particularly in and around Hartford, when Hartford is a small city compared to where I was born, it's tough for me to accept that
Yeah.
because I run in a number of circles, been fortunate to, be around conversations, see things unfold that has helped the community many times over. And yet there is that one person in every table that says, nobody's doing this.
Yeah.
How can people accurately pulse what gaps exist, and how can people begin to identify if there absolutely are no organizations or groups not filling those gaps?
So, as a young, naive individual, I was probably saying very similar things, you know, quickly got kicked off my high horse. And it's not necessarily,
Welcome to Hartford.
yeah, you know, no one's doing X, Y, and Z, but there needs to be more people doing X, Y, and Z,
I'm feeling that.
instead of kind of pointing fingers or saying this doesn't exist, you know, really understanding maybe why something hasn't been sustainable, or reaching out and looking at who's already doing this, what type of resources do they need to make it even better. And that, I think, having that lens is where you can really start growing things. Like we've leveraged other organizations or worked with our other organizations to make our programming bigger and better, rather than trying to just duplicating the same thing. That, you know, saying a mentoring program doesn't exist in Hartford. There's so many mentoring programs that exist in Hartford. You know, Big Brother, Big Sister. You know, Hartford Communities That Care, I know, has a strong mentoring program, and you know, the list goes on. But how can you work with those organizations to make it better?
Mm,
Or come together for events, and instead of each of you impacting 10 kids through your program, how can you impact 50 kids in that program?
yep.
So I think it's kind of, you know, not necessarily saying, being that person at the table that says this doesn't exist, but looking at it and saying, where else does this actually exist, and how can we make it bigger and better?
Man, I'm feeling that. You know, the theme for this year's Emerging Leaders Conference is strategic partnerships that bridge the gap. And ideally, the concept is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only person doing what you do,
Mm-hmm.
fill in the blank, whatever that is. There are people who are interested in or actually actively doing what you claim you're the only
Mm-hmm.
person doing, or you're the only person that cares about it. And this year's conference is intended to be that expose of those groups who are doing X, Y, and Z,
Mm-hmm.
and to hear those groups present, to hear funders talk about the necessity of partnerships and strategic relationships as they continue to support the community through their giving, and to hear a couple of keynotes on how to market, on how to leverage those partnerships, and then a case study. I mean, that's pretty much the
Mm-hmm.
agenda. And I think for me, hearing you talk about filling the gap, we mentioned a couple of organizations that in the city who are doing those things, and then you talk about the fact that if you combine efforts, you can serve so many more
Yeah.
people. To me, that is in response to the other three things you mentioned, like resources. That's how you leverage resources. Resources is not just money.
Mm-hmm.
Resources may be other people's money or other people's
Yeah.
assets. Staying in your lane, knowing what you're really good at,
Mm-hmm.
and stop trying to recreate the wheel or jump in someone else's lane. And then lastly, leverage your network. And I think your network is not just people who are in your phone,
Right.
right? It's not just people who are in your email. Either your network are people who exist that you haven't reached out to,
Yeah.
who are doing things similar to what you got
Mm-hmm.
going on.
Yeah. One thing I've learned is, you know, Hartford's a very open community. You know, like there is nobody I've ever reached out to that won't grab a cup of coffee with you or won't have a conversation with you, no matter how high up they may be in an organization. And I think it's having the confidence to just reach out and ask, you know, even if you get 30 minutes of their time and you never talk to them again, or you don't talk to them for a few years until, you know, you need them, or want to do something with them. I think Hartford's a very welcoming place to be and start a venture, and people are willing to teach it and you know, collaborate and work together.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So share with us more about Section 7 housing. Where did that concept come from? And then I do want to talk a bit about sustainability and the concepts behind that. So Section 7 housing.
Yeah, so that really came out of a huge need of working in, you know, the schools for a while, and just being a part of the community, and seeing a lot of, you know, transient nature, you know, families and kids that we were working with bouncing house to house, living in terrible, you know, conditions, and wanting to help solve that, you know, one of that being one of the problems we solve, um, but without necessarily having state and federal HUD Section 8 grants. How can you pivot to solve it? And, you know, uniquely created a model that is able to do that by leveraging kind of mixed income housing to give incredible quality and employment to individuals that live in the properties, on top of being able to welcome people into Hartford and meet people in the community. So, one of our goals was to change the misconception that people have when they're coming to Hartford. You hear, oh, Hartford's such a bad place. All of our properties are in Asylum Hill. And so we have individuals who are working at the corporations downtown or come in for conferences in the hospitals who are staying in these communities and are being welcomed and, eating at the same dinner table as people from the north end of it environment, and a welcoming environment. So being able to change the perception of Hartford, providing affordable housing, and also improving historic blighted properties is some of the things that we've been able to tackle.
So how did you guys arrive at the decision to become sustainable in terms of your revenue and sustaining the history
You
of
just
Rise
got
Up?
to be, it's especially when it's such big assets, like, and you're putting a lot of personal money on the line. You have to figure out that sustainability, especially when we've had Hartford Foundation for Public Giving walk through the properties and pitch the model, and the grant makers aren't always looking to fund new and innovative ideas. So you have to just create something sustainable.
That's true.
And that's what it comes down to is just knowing the impact you're having and being able and knowing that sustainability is the only option if you want to continue having that impact.
Yeah, so the green book over my shoulder,
Yeah.
the sustainable book, was written because of what you just shared. And the genesis of the book begins with the idea that traditional revenue sources that nonprofits rely upon, grant making sources or contracts, really they're kind of drying up for a number of reasons. One, the increasing number of nonprofits in the community. You're right, we need more who are serving the community, but that also creates more people in the sandbox, but the sandbox is not getting bigger.
Yeah.
Then two, funders are saying, well, look, if Rise Up does this and ABC organization does this, and you guys serve the same group of people, you guys might as well work together, and let's just split the grant between the two of you guys. Versus years ago, they would just give the whole thing to you.
Yeah.
And I think that scenario has created the necessity for nonprofits to become sustainable. What we're saying in the book is, sustainability has everything to do with your ability to earn revenue. 6% of a nonprofit's typical revenue budget comes from events, cupcake sales, car washes, like the little off the side projects. You can interpret that data two ways. One, to say, yeah, we are not going to put enough effort into those things because it's whatever. Or two, we're going to grow that 6% to like 10, 15, 20% to other revenue sources. That includes rent, that includes selling a service, that includes any other investments the nonprofit makes. And yes, nonprofits can make those investments because the nonprofit has the capacity to generate a profit, but the profits come back to the nonprofit. So, when you say nonprofits have to become sustainable for a startup, is it too early to think that far down the road about sustainability, or should a startup nonprofit literally just do and go until it can't anymore, and then begin thinking about sustainability?
So I kind of started with the traditional. Well, I just started, before there was even a grant in the bank to start, working in education. But I would argue that should be up front. That should be in the DNA of the organization because it creates that revenue source and it creates other opportunities for the people you're serving, right? So at Changarosa, for example, it was part of the Bears Restaurant Group in Union Station. The murals inside Changarosa and even the hardwood floors inside Changarosa, Handy Vision was paid to help provide the employment and the staff to help refinish those floors and do the actual some labor inside. And Hartford Murals was paid to help organize all the muraling inside Changarosa, and that was all done at a cost. You know, this wasn't a nonprofit working with another nonprofit or a donation to a nonprofit. This was, we're going to provide you work, and now this work is going to pay local artists. It's going to pay part of our trade handyman training program, these individuals, and it's also going to leave money back in the account for the nonprofit organization to be sustainable and pay its bills, without having to write a single grant proposal to Aetna or Travelers or any of those organizations. So if I had that mindset, back in 2012 when I first started, we may be much further along in the development of some of these
So
programs.
someone may be asking right now, what earned revenue strategy should I deploy from my nonprofit for my special project?
I think it depends on what how you're serving the community. I think every lever can be different. So like our big focus was education and what are you going to do after high school. And so a very good fit is handiwork and developing a trade that can create a sustainable life for yourself. So that obviously made a lot of sense for us. And then the artwork component, we have a big community service where we want to leave the community better than it was before we came, and we think creating artwork in the community is what can do it. So that's kind of how we've landed at some of our sustainable revenue sources. But I think everything, it's all dependent upon what you're doing and how you want to go about doing it.
So let me drop some advice for those of you who are listening. One of the things you said when we were talking about strategies for launching a venture was to stay in your lane. And in the book, Sustainable, I write that nonprofits have gotten in trouble engaging in fundraising activities that are so outside of the core
Mm-hmm.
competency of the group, right? So it's easy to say, hey, let's go do a car wash.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, anybody can do that, but like, if you ever done it, it's really annoying to get cars to stop and pull
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
and you're the weird person on the corner with a weird sign that
Mm-hmm.
says, "Hey, come get a car wash," and I'm the driver with no cash, looking at you like,
Mm-hmm.
"Nah, I don't got no
Yeah,
money
yeah.
to pay anyway." And there are nonprofits that have started businesses where no one on staff has had any experience doing that
Mm-hmm.
business. I would suggest that any nonprofit starting a for-profit business or venture should start a venture it has a core competency
Yeah,
in or hire a professional.
that's it. Yep.
And it is expensive hiring a professional in certain arenas, but I'm gonna give one example, and this goes back to the Section 7. I'm a real estate guy, love it
Mm-hmm.
through and through, had a small business in Philadelphia around real estate. It's one of the most affordable methods of starting a business and hiring a professional. One of the things I struggled hearing nonprofits talk about over the years was, I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to get the calls at night. I mean, that's not even realistic. As
Right.
someone who has owned multiple properties, I've never gotten those calls.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've learned early in my investment career was, after my wife and I got tired of just landlording, it wasn't bad. It's just we hired a manager,
Mm-hmm.
and they collect a percentage of your rental income. If you buy
Yeah.
smart and your expenses aren't crazy high, it's nothing to pay 6 to 10% of your
Right.
rental revenue to a manager who's responsible for maintaining a Rolodex of handy
You
persons,
got it.
companies who are
Mm-hmm.
going to respond to physical issues in the building, and who's going to fill the calls with the leaky toilet. Now, again, it's affordable to hire that type of expertise. It does take some sort of skill to buy the right property.
Mm-hmm.
You and I can talk about that, right? But I think it's an example of ways to leverage your existing resources. I did a podcast months ago called Chicken Dinners, and it was intended to kind of talk about this concept,
Yeah.
because Black churches are known for chicken dinners as fundraisers.
Yep.
Nobody has a competency in making mass quantities of soul food. Like nobody on church staff, none of the ushers,
Yeah.
but we do it to pay for a roof or a new boiler. And one of the things I argued in that podcast was instead of having people donate the meat and the candied yams and the
Mm.
sweet potatoes and the mac and cheese and the styrofoam plates and the overly sugary Kool-Aid that was placed in the styrofoam cup, was to take those dollars invested, add it up for a year, and invest in a local business that exists in your community, your barbershops, your car washes, your beauty salons, your dry cleaners that may be owned by people that look like you if you're a minority, or people you just trust in your community. That amount of money you invested can turn over so many times and have the desired impact. And if you're in a youth development, as you are, you can put some young people to work
Yeah.
by investing those
Yeah.
dollars.
I think the nonprofit industry, I mean, let's be straight. You know, a lot of the nonprofit industry is not even run by people in or from the
community.
Hartford.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so they're not necessarily thinking about how we can make, you know, my salary turn over over and over in the community.
Yep.
But I think that's such a valid point that the industry itself is just not thinking about, and it almost it's risky. You know, they see it as risk, even though there's, you know, less risk in that than, you know, planning on you know, chicken dinners every night. So I it's something that we see eye to eye on, you know, and I think I would implore other nonprofits to try and think a little bit more innovative, and look, there's a reason why uh, you know, investment firms last and are sustainable and can be nimble even when there's downs. You know, there's probably a lot more nonprofits that were hurt because of the financial crash than actual investors that were out there, because you diversify, you know, you make sure you hedge your bets, and you have a sustainable, you know, even if your housing value drops down to a half of what it is, you still have monthly cash flow coming in that's going to be the same rate it was before the value of the house. And guess what? That value of the property is going to bounce back in a couple of years. So it's it's just a different way of thinking that I think more organizations should take advantage of.
If Bears, which for those of you who aren't local here, it's a Greater Hartford barbecue restaurant. Not saying that they're going to do this. This is completely fictitious, so don't get on me. But if Bears decided to publicly announce that we are looking to open up 5 more locations and we're taking on cash investors local to Hartford, how many of those investors do you think would be nonprofits?
Probably none. There may be a couple that have maybe a financial advisor who's managing their endowment that may think about it, but they wouldn't think about it from the lens of, oh wow, this could provide jobs to my clients that I'm.
You just stole my thunder.
You know,
because everybody local knows that Bears is a second chance employer.
Yeah.
And they stay busy, so they're not going out of business. God forbid, right? Let's, you know, wish blessings upon Bears for what they do. But they stay busy in all the locations that they have. They hire people who are second chance, or this is their first job, and their owners, the owners of Bears, are pretty vocal about that. And if they decided to open up 5 more locations, and you're a nonprofit, a startup even, and all you have is, let's say, a couple $1,000s to invest in a project, your passion project. And let's say it's youth. Let's say it's homeless youth. Let's say it's victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, whatever your passion is, and you have a couple $1,000s. In my mind, I think it's hard for startup nonprofits to have this conversation to even consider that's the first step I should take, because that's not what's widely talked about as the logical step a nonprofit takes in its trajectory of life. What we're saying for those who are watching is, perhaps if you're starting out, it might be a good idea to look at a safe business
Mhm.
in the community that can have a positive impact on your client base, and invest in that business, because the return is going to be what it is,
Yep.
whatever the terms are, and the outcomes to say that, you know what, before you get placed in Bears, I'm going to put you through the Rise Up University for Workforce
Yeah.
Readiness. And we're going to put you through our rotational program of the mural arts program, Handy Vision, Mama J's,
Mhm.
and etc. And then we're going to send you to Bears to make more than minimum wage. I believe
Mhm.
that's what they offer. And not only do I have the outcomes, as you talked about, as a nonprofit starting out
Mhm.
small, but my investment towards my long-term sustainability is growing because I have personal young people, adults that I've invested in working there,
Mhm.
providing quality service, making quality meat and sides, providing excellent customer service, who are perpetuating this
Mhm.
brand of Bears, which means perpetuating the brand that I've invested in.
Mhm.
And as you talked about, that leads to sustainability.
Yeah. But I think one of the challenges just comes back to like the structure of the industry. You know, if you think about how many nonprofits are reliant on state or federal money,
Yeah.
like there's so many restrictions on that. You know, you
Yeah.
have to count how many, pencils you buy to send back to
Yeah.
them. And I think there's so much of that reliance on, a lot of these nonprofits are just extensions of the government, like government services almost, that it makes that a little bit challenging, but it creates a huge opportunity for, individuals like us who are going out and trying to start something new, and I know you had Abdul on here a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago. And if you look at all the initiatives he has, whether it's outside of my people, the actual clinical services he's providing, which is a service, um, all the other work he's doing, it's under like a sustainable model. Like
Yeah.
he's bringing, men together and they're doing, empowerment work, but it's a sustainable model because they're going on trips and people have to pay to go on those trips. If you look at Ice Cream for a Dream, well, he does a lot of free work with that. Corporations will, pay
Sponsor. Oh,
him
yours.
to.
You're a sponsor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but like travelers will
Yeah.
will pay to have him come and give ice cream to their employees. Have them tell their dreams, so he can then do it for free for the community.
Hmm.
And so I think it leaves a huge opportunity for other individuals outside of kind of the old kind of industry to define a new industry. And I look at Uber, like the taxi industry 15, 20 years ago, people say he's untouchable, because of a lot of the government regulations and all of that. But you have some innovative folks who, come to the table and completely change it all. And there's, talk about someone coming to the table and say, oh, no one else is doing this. Look at how many people are doing ride sharing. Uber is not the mastermind behind ride sharing. They've just done it the best and have had the most investment, but it's not their idea, like this idea of ride sharing. They've just done it the best, and there's other platforms out there that do it well too. So
Yeah, I mean, and you're so right. And I would say that projects like Section 7, you can replace Bears with Section 7.
Mhm.
And let's say you guys open up shares,
Yeah.
to invest, which I don't know if you guys are doing that, but let us know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if that is a public announcement,
Mhm.
and you have a startup nonprofit that's struggling to buy crayons for
Mhm.
kids, because you just want to buy crayons for kids every school year,
Yeah.
and you need money outside of your own salary, you might want to take the little money you raised, invest it in a match.